a lot of experimentation. Like if you're not constantly iterating and learning new things, then it's hard to, evaluate that you're being successful. It's how you measure success. So going back to some of what Rachel was saying, we've learned a ton by having these initial conversations to lay the foundation with customers and potential customers.
Okay, we got 2 friendly faces this time. Usually we do one-on-ones, but hey, from Penfield.AI, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us, Ravi.
Yeah, we're excited to be here.
As I was explaining before the episode, Madeleine and Rachel, great to have some female faces on. Right, we've been desperately looking forward to have more representation, from the startup side, especially from females, especially from it's been uniquely challenging. It's weird. Like I actually reached out to a reporter friend of mine and saying, how can we better get representation, especially in covering female-led companies, right, and female faces behind it. And I'm really enjoying have you guys on, talk about especially something interesting as cybersecurity, right? Penfield.AI, you guys are working on cybersecurity threats and problems. I'm really intrigued to see from your perspective what that means. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks. We're excited for this conversation. It's great to hear that you're putting that kind of effort in.
Yeah. So let's get started right from the beginning. So Penfield.AI, you guys help with threat detection with cybersecurity attacks. Can you talk a little bit more about what that means?
Yeah, for sure. So it's interesting, actually, we're not in the detection space. It's a mistake that's quite common because a lot of times there are tools for detection and then there are tools for remediation, but we're actually sitting in a unique gap in between. So with Penfield, we sit between cybersecurity analysts and their computers and all the tools that they work with to optimize the process between the two. And Penfield's actually the first company that has the ability to model the skill sets of cybersecurity analysts in real time and use that data to perform the actions that the engine then performs.
Yeah, that gives that's quite a mouthful to digest, right? Can we talk into what the mechanics of that really is? Because when you think of cybersecurity, you think of those hackers with multi-screens with the code running back and forth. What kind of tool sets can benefit them? Can you go into detail?
Yeah, for sure. So some of the existing tools that analysts tend to use are SIM tools, ticketing tools, SOAR tools, and these tools are awesome. Like SOAR tools, we saw a big notion in 2017, which was that AI was going to automate everything and everyone's life was going to be substantially better because everything that's complicated was going to get automated and people can just kind of sit back and manage the machines. And it didn't really turn out to be that way. So our founder, Tassine, he was working in the industry as a cybersecurity consultant when everyone was putting all the automation into play. And to be honest, those SOAR tools do a really great job of automating static processes, which is why they've become so popular. But there was just a gap because in certain industries, you can automate a lot of the work, but in cybersecurity, it's very dynamic. The hackers that you're talking about with all of their many screens, they're always changing their approaches because if something on our side gets automated, they'll just find a new way around it. And so since it's a dynamic problem, you need a dynamic solution. So that's where the idea of Penfield came about.
Cool. So I want to digest that a little bit further because cybersecurity has become such a hallmark moment, a hallmark industry for us right now, especially with COVID and a lot of people now working from home, right? Like they've left the security infrastructure of the commercial plazas, of their home, of the commercial offices, and now they're sitting at home, running on home networks. We recently had Mick B from Y-Space from York University. He's an entrepreneur in residence there, as well as running his own cybersecurity firm. And he was talking about this. There's so many methodology for penetration attacks to occur and happen. And as a layperson, you don't really know who's out there protecting you. We know the RCMP is out there doing something. We know there's probably some governmental agency out there looking for us. But often what we hear is these white hat hackers, right? People who are just running tests on environments and then tweeting about it hey, by the way, Burger King, your network's open, right? I'm not sure if Burger King ever had that, but just as an example, right? Like
You'll be getting a call from Burger King later.
yeah, but for an example standpoint, like we generally hear of things when they go wrong, right?
Right.
Like it's actually a good thing when things are quiet. So, but like the issue with that is like what's actually happening behind the scenes. It's such a question mark, right? Like how do we protect ourselves? Who's protecting ourselves? What's this industry look like?
Well, I
Yeah.
think
Sorry, go ahead, Madeleine.
I was going to say that I think that's a great point. And people in security operations centers, which is currently the customers that we're targeting, they're inundated with attacks because only some make it to be headline news. Like SolarWinds is everyone's talking about that, but they're inundated, and especially with COVID, like phishing attacks were up like 300%. Like like there's the nation state hackers, and there's also the 9 to 5 hackers who, like everyone else, they go to work and every day, and they're trying to figure out how to trick people into sending them money or whatever it is. And so who we target, we're trying to help people be more efficient because as Rachel said, the landscape is so dynamic. So as hackers get smarter, we have to be a step ahead. And so that's where we're trying to find extra efficiencies. And our tool is really exciting. We've been able to demonstrate 38% gains in efficiency, and also improve on the back end some accuracies. We can detect some anomalies in how analysts are resolving threats. And so the quality assurance analysts or the auditors can further explore that, cut through the noise, and further explore whether that anomalous behavior was fine, or whether we should revisit how that attack was remediated to ensure that that organization is staying secure.
Great, yeah. Can we talk about your personal journeys? How did you guys move into the cybersecurity world? How'd you end up here?
I can go first. Madeleine has a bit more of a background with Penfield. Her story is quite exciting, but for myself, I did my bachelor's, my BA at Queen's University, and after that, I was working with a number of end customers in my previous job that were in financial institutions, fintech, and I joined Penfield just this past September. Actually, the company was just 2 people before then, completely bootstrapped for 2 years, and I joined in September along with a couple others, and that's really where my story with Penfield got started. It was my first exposure to cybersecurity, and it's the biggest surprise for me was that, one, I thought it was just going to be the most ridiculous learning curve, and it is, but at the end of the day, I'm not the one solving the cybersecurity threat. I'm trying to bring a tool to the market that's going to help with that. So it's been more of a really pleasant surprise that it's such a welcoming community. I think it's unique from a lot of industries in that in cybersecurity, everyone's working together against an external bad guy. We're not fighting against all of the other cybersecurity startups out there because we're not each other's enemy. There's a greater enemy out there. And so it's great to feel like we're a part of a common good that's working to help our society.
Yeah. And Madeleine, how about you?
Yeah, so I'm still in my last year of school at University of Toronto, getting my combined law MBA degree. And so, I had experiences working in a startup before. I worked at Blue Jay Legal, another Toronto tech company, and I really enjoyed the startup environment atmosphere. And so I started learning about privacy and cybersecurity more from a legal side and compliance side, and really enjoyed that. And then I got involved through the MBA with the Creative Destruction Lab. And so they're affiliated with Rotman, they're an accelerator, and Tassine and Penfield, it was then called BB Labs, and we can go more into that story. It was Tassine and the co-founder, and they were super young. We got along really well. So because of that, we just forged this relationship. I was working sort of as a co-op student or in a really informal basis, but getting to know the business. And so I similarly started in September at the same time as Rachel, in a marketing capacity. And it's just been crazy the past few months. We've seen a lot of growth. And I would echo what Rachel was saying, which is that I don't have a technical background at all. And so it can seem super daunting, but it's a community that's really oriented around we're we're in this together. As cheesy as that sounds, and almost silly to say, it does seem to be like an anchoring culture, anchoring theme among different cybersecurity companies, like enterprise or startup. So that's
Yeah.
been nice and rewarding.
Yeah, and that's what I've been hearing about the cybersecurity world, right? Like people are really, really bound together. Like I think you said it best when you said like, we're all in this together because everyone is kind of like, okay, like there are threat actors. So we have this barrier that we're all kind of responsible to maintain, and everyone's kind of playing their part. And so that ecosystem there is, I think it's very unique. It's very closely knit because it's like almost like you're in a battle constantly. So your soldiers in the front line. So like you kind of get bound together, right? So speaking about coming from a non-technical background and moving into like a high-tech company, especially like a cybersecurity firm, right? I mean, there must be some unique challenges. What are some growing pains you had to go through, especially working with a startup?
For me, it was just understanding how it actually works. I
Yeah.
think that artificial intelligence in general is such a topic that very few people know a lot about. And we're really fortunate to have a founding team and an advisory team that are some of the best thinkers in Canada in this space. Some of the professors that we're affiliated with are some of the most published researchers in artificial intelligence, human computer interaction, and this stuff all went over my head on day one. And it was just a matter of asking a million questions and really trying to understand what it's about. But like we've touched on, everyone's so welcome to sharing and welcome to bringing new people into the community that it was just a really enjoyable experience getting brought up to speed and learning something new every single day.
Yeah, I was just going to add that there's also like a huge humility component of just being, willing to listen, because there was definitely a time at which I thought I understood what we did at the very early stages when I met Tassine in those CDL Creative Destruction Lab days. And the more, I would attend meetings and phone calls and hear him give pitches, and my understanding has evolved and become more nuanced. And so just being willing to sit a bit with that discomfort of learning and having that growth set mentality of reading and trying to get all the knowledge you can. I think that's been really helpful for me.
Yeah. Let's talk about starting out, like joining a startup, right? I think it's a very unique perspective of people, like a type of people who start companies, entrepreneurs who are innovators who are going to be like taking on this challenge. But there's also a very unique subset of people who join these early stage companies, right? I had Charles Ratnam from Knowledge Hook explain this to me. It's like a scale, right? Like there's visionaries and there's operators, and everyone kind of fits into kind of a scale. The visionaries see the vision, they see the mountaintop, and they're haunted by it. They want to reach it, and the operators kind of build on top of it, and you kind of need both facets into the company, right? For you guys to decide such early on in your careers to join a startup, right, rather than go into more traditional larger firm to go out and learn. What was the mindset there? Because generally, fresh out of university, you want to go into a large firm or you want to learn, right? But you don't necessarily get that step. You don't actually get to learn that much, right? Because you have entry level jobs. The benefit of startups, you get to wear many hats, you get to jump around, you get to learn rapidly and quickly, but not necessarily be able to feed off of that, the brand potential of a bigger firm, right? So career wise, like why join a startup? Was it the problem? Was it the company? Was it a personal choice?
It's a big question. I think that, I think it's just a lot of different things mixed into one bowl. In part, the opportunity to be really creative and to see problems and to be part of the part of like informing strategy and coming up with solutions. Like that's invigorating for me. I think people that get energy from complicated solutions and being a part of that process and high level conversations, I think those kinds of people are drawn to startups, at least for me. And I also think maybe this is a cop-out answer partially, but we were really lucky to join at the same time that we were in all these accelerators. So as I mentioned, we graduated from the Creative Destruction Lab last year, and then this year we were in the a DMZ or Ryerson affiliated catalyst called the Roger Cybersecurity Catalyst, and we're still part of the 500 Startup Accelerator. And that's a global accelerator. And so at the same time as we were starting, you were saying when you instead of joining a large firm, you join a startup. there's no one above you to learn from, but we had a lot of strong mentorship. So that's been, maybe that softened it a little bit.
I can imagine.
Learning opportunity for me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's exciting to have the opportunity to build something out from scratch and be a part of that growth journey. And, you hear stories all the time about that founding team that just IPO'd, and it's like, man, imagine being one of those first people. That's such a cool journey to be a part of. But to echo Madeleine's point, we've had this support structure around us that helped us validate that the foundation we were relying was actually a good one and was actually going to be scalable, which was so beneficial.
Yeah.
And I think that, oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to add that, so a bit of context to Penfield is that we used to be called Bibu Labs, and primarily up until the name change, it was in like the research stage, I would say. And so we also joined at the time when the name change was happening, when we were transitioning into this product company, the SaaS company. And so it was also just a really pivotal time in the company when we joined. And a bit of background, because this is just I think a fun, interesting story. The reason why we chose the name Penfield is because Wilder Penfield is a doctor, a Canadian neurosurgeon who is famous around the world for mapping out functions of the brain. And we thought there was a really nice analogy into what we were doing as a Canadian company, mapping out the skill sets and the functions of analysts. And so while Penfield did it to unlock medical treatments, we're doing it to unlock other types of solutions. And so just like putting ourselves in that tradition of doing something innovative, and paying tribute to our Canadian roots. We're based from more Waterloo. Penfield was in Montreal, but that's our origin story.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite a list of incubators and accelerators you guys are part of and gone through. I mean, starting with Creative Detection Lab, it's like that's one of the top tier, probably globally, especially in the country, accelerators that's known and recognized. So I mean, that's quite an experience to go through for sure. I think a lot of people are just jealously watching, like, I wish I was part of that, because it's so hard to get into. Right, it's such a challenge to get into. So kudos for you, for Penfield for getting into that program. But talking more on that about mentorship and growth, right? Right. So working with a startup, just like what you said, like you get to grow really quickly. You get to wear multiple hats, and like Rachel said, like that journey of going from like a lower, like starting level to IPO, seeing a company raise, like what goes into that. I think that's such a unique perspective. Right, like that's the only very few people get to see that kind of level of growth, right? But going back to like COVID and the situation right now, you were talking earlier about everything's virtual, you're running everything virtual, right? Even your programming sessions are virtual, your team meetings are virtual. How you two even physically have not met yet, right? How have those challenges, have those brought in extra additional challenges, or has that smoothed things over, being able to work in your own time and your own pace?
I don't know, just because we don't have anything to compare it to.
Yeah.
It's just our reality. Before COVID, it was just the two co-founders, and the rest of the team joined during COVID. So I think that because we don't really know an alternative way to working together, it's been very efficient. It's great to be able to get everyone together, even if we're not in the same city, even if we're not in the same time zone. It's, I don't know. I think that from a sales perspective, it's been interesting not being able to meet face to face with prospective customers and share that journey. It's a whole different level of trying to build connections, but it's been pretty good. I think a lot of people have just adapted and accepted that this is business, and everyone is trying to drive their businesses forward. And I don't think, at least from my experience, nobody's really let it get in the way.
Yeah.
And I guess it's also, what's nice is you can have back-to-back meetings. So you don't have to have that travel time. So you can fit in more calls, you can fit in more meetings. Like we benefited a lot from, so the 500 Startup Accelerator is global, and a lot of the people are in Asia or in other parts of North America. And so we've been able to have mentorship calls with them, even though they're in different time zones and around the world. But so that's been in terms of your mentorship question, like that's been that's been really nice. But I mean, I guess I'm being honest, I do miss that human side. Like it is, I think when we are able to go back into an office, it will be super nice, and maybe there's some synergies we don't even know we're missing. But up until this point, we have been managing. Everyone is taking technical issues in stride, and everyone's just
I guess
being
it would
okay
be
when
nice.
kids pop into meetings. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, yeah. It would be nice, I guess, to turn and ask the engineering team a question about the product, or ask, someone else a detail. Like I can just turn to Madeleine and ask a question. And now it's kind of like, are you free for a quick call? But everyone's so accommodating, and everyone works really well together. A lot of times Madeleine and I just go to the engineering meetings to try to absorb as much information as possible and try to soak it all up. But to your point, Madeleine, actually, if it wasn't COVID, the 500 startups one, like Tassine would have to be in San Francisco for it.
Yeah.
But which would have been a really cool experience. And I think the connections that you'd be able to meet through that would be incredible. But since it's been virtual, we've been able to get so much done in the meantime, because we're all able to still be here in Toronto in this time zone, focusing on scaling the company.
Yeah. Like I think that you brought up a great point, but like turning around and ask an engineering problem or talk to marketing, right? Like working in like a small, nimble team is that you're small and nimble, but also you have to feed off each other, right? Like one of the quintessential like constructs of being a startup is like you live and work together, like especially with California style, like like you rent out a house, your coworkers and your co-living, right? Incubator spaces. That's always been like the high point of like entrepreneurship, right? Like being able to experience that. But at the same time, like I went through this in my first company, but at the same time, like when you work and live with the people that you're going to start up with, you tend to start hating them because you get to learn too much about them, right? So there's been pros and cons to that. But like with what you said, like like what do you do when you just can't turn around and like ask an engineering question? Like I think that was one of the problems in like getting to a work from home environment, right? Like before COVID, only 4% of our workforce worked from home. Now it's 40%. And the main reason that that 4% was growing very, very slowly was that everyone thought that if you work from home, like you wouldn't just have those like water cooler moments where you just walk by each other, say what up, and an idea blooms, or like you learn about something, or like the different departments and different responsibilities are kind of like converging in like a more natural setting, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then again, now companies are discovering, saying, hold on, like we're scheduling this and we're meeting up, we're actually have more free time, but like we're now purposefully doing that, trying to figure out what are you working on? What am I working on? We're like we're more in tune to sharing. But again, that natural kind of like bump into each other at the water cooler moment is gone.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I do miss those moments. I think there's also something to be said for diversity and diversity of experiences. Like some people in our team have children and are involved in some of the childcare responsibilities, and so it's easier in that they can be around and just like duck out for a meeting. Like I think it's enabled our team to be really flexible. But yeah, like I think we've also had to really encourage a culture of using video to add that human side. I know some firms are just doing, or some companies are just doing phone calls, but because we're new and we're meeting each other virtually, like that's been nice. Like me and Rachel are so close now, and we'll just chat and we'll just get on the phone or Zoom just to talk about whatever. But I think that's unique and something we've like purposely had to put energy into cultivating, because you're right, like it is hard.
Yeah. Switching back into cybersecurity and the landscape, right? Like the SolarWinds hack that just recently happened, really, I think that was a huge moment in the industry, and because it made it more mainstream. Like generally, small hacks happen, private hacks happen in companies. Equifax got their entire database scraped, and that was horrifying. But like no one really saw the ramifications of it, right? But with like these kind of hacks that kind of happen, and these kind of cybersecurity faults, right? Like each time we kind of like the public kind of wakens up and realizes, oh my God, like what's happening? Where's our data? Like like these big institutions might not necessarily be safe, right? And now everyone's starting to ask these questions. How can everything collaboratively be taken care of, right? Like especially as an individual or a small business owner, right? where you don't have the sophistication of having like a CTO who knows this stuff, or a cybersecurity professional, or a team or organization working behind you, right? Like it's like you're in this dark gray zone of like, I'm just operating. I don't really know if I'm safe, but like I'm hoping I just fly under the radar. What have you guys learned or experienced, or like might be good principles for people to practice, or just to be like aware of?
Man, big question. Well, I think the first thing that this is a slightly off topic, but the first thing that I realized with the SolarWinds attack was it seemed like the whole community kind of rallied behind them and acknowledged that like it happened, but it could have happened to any of us. And instead of it being, let's bash SolarWinds, they're the worst, it was, you know what, if this happened to them, a leader in the industry, like we should all up our game because we really need to look out for each other. So that was a realization that I had, and that I know a lot of people recognized and appreciated as well. From a more personal side, we spoke with a detective with the Toronto Police last quarter, and a big part of his job is educating employees on internal best practices to ensure that they aren't a weak point, because a lot of hackers will send any random employee an email and all it takes is to click a link and the whole company is at risk. And like I think that's training that a lot of people don't think about or don't really take so seriously. I know I probably never thought twice about it before joining this company, and now I'm terrified of my every move. But I think there's so much for every single person to learn and to continue learning about.
Yeah, and also I'm like, a personal passion of mine is privacy. And privacy and cybersecurity are complements. And so I think that like people are watching not The Social Network, what's it called, The Social Dilemma,
Social
that
Dilemma,
documentary on
yeah.
Netflix, and like there's sort of a rise in consciousness about privacy issues as well, especially all those anti-competition or antitrust suits in the States as well. And so just to be aware that there are linkages between the two, because I think privacy has become this sexy topic in cybersecurity, despite SolarWinds and Equifax and all these other issues. I think privacy is more at the fore, but they're really linked. They're so intimately linked. You know, like looking back at this is maybe a topic, but relates to Toronto and innovation. When the Sidewalk Labs project was being talked about in Toronto, there was a lot of talk about, well, what's going to happen with our data and how is it going to be protected? And there were conversations, maybe we'll develop this thing called the data trust, and what does it actually look like? And that aside, it was great that there were conversations about like trying to add rigor to that. But what about the cybersecurity side? Like I read the entire report, and there was very little, like it was like a 300-page report, and there was very little, if anything, on cybersecurity, at least in any like sort of rigorous way. And so just being aware of that. And then in terms of best practices, I mean, I still have friends who have the same password for all of their different domains. And so even though it sounds basic, I mean, I would just urge people to just really not do that. You know, like credential stuffing. If they find your password on a different site, that's easier to hack into, then that, you know, opens the floodgates for and, you know, find if you have any sort of account online that has any sensitive information, then that would be at risk.
Yeah. Like from your research and from your knowledge, like is there any major moves happening within the industry to, you know, to like have like I guess an upgrade for not just a system, like as an industry on maybe not best practices from a human level, but from a systems level? Like how do we move forward into a world where we're no longer worried about this, right? Like now in modern day societies, we're no longer worried that the next village over is going to invade us, right? War has become like, you know, it has become almost like a faraway concept, right? We become safer in society. And I guess the internet and the online world is going through this like alpha stage of growth, right? Like the Wild West, where everything's kind of like turmoil, but we're going past that, we're evolving past that, right? Is there any major shifts happening to like better protect us as a nation, as a society?
Well, I think that I think if you think about how quickly the internet has changed, it's tremendous. And so I think even though it seemed like we've had internet for so long, I think the reason why there's still so many kinks and companies for so long underdeveloped in cybersecurity is because there wasn't the notion wasn't solidified yet company-wide that these things mattered. It was like the, like IT used to be like, in the basements, if you ever watched that IT show, with Chris O'Dowd, and that, it's a spoof on that, but that they were relegated to the basement. No one really cared about them. And so I think that we're seeing that shift 100%, and that mentality of a breach mentality, which means acknowledging that we will have some breaches. So how do we mitigate? How do we have any resilience plans in place? Coming up with playbooks. So I think there's been a lot of really fantastic shifts, and that's been percolating all throughout all different industries that have technical assets. And I think part of it is like what we as consumers can do too, and we can be more privacy literate or technically literate. This is when people talk about like hacks into Ring or those like smart home devices. So oftentimes those are just because people had poor passwords, as opposed to someone penetrating a system in a sophisticated way, which goes back to my earlier point about passwords. But just to say that there are the big threats that people, that like the really sophisticated cybersecurity experts are working on, but there's also the smaller things that we can mitigate.
Yeah. I think what you said right there is like, it's so important, right? Like most, like especially in individual cases, even largest cases, penetrations happen because of passwords, right? Like user credentials. People, people pretend to be you, and the human element is the most dangerous part, right? And what blows my mind is like how little training people get on not even just best practices, but how things work, right? I think there's a big movement now in education, especially with COVID and education changing and being a catalyst towards it, is how do we modernize our training, right, for the future generations. And part of that is like, finally bringing financial knowledge into the institutions so people know what a mortgage is. But I think part of that is going to be learning code, or learning machine language, how machines communicate and work, how to interface better with them, right? So from like a younger age, train that upwards and bring it there. Do you guys have any personal thoughts about like how it's like, what are things that you wish you knew growing up that you were like, why wasn't I taught this earlier?
Yeah, all of that. I see there's some curriculums now that include coding, and I think that's the coolest thing. Imagine having that kind of access. Like we would learn, printing and cursive writing, but now there's a third language involved there where you're also learning coding. I think that's super cool. In cybersecurity specifically, it's very well known there's a massive, massive talent shortage worldwide. It's not unique to Canada, it's not unique to Toronto, but it's a huge issue. And it's a really big problem because, as Madeleine touched on earlier, there's more threats than ever. There's more hackers than ever, there's more problems than ever. And we, as we've mentioned, we rely on the people to solve that problem. But if you don't have people in the seats, how can you protect yourself? How can we protect the country, the individuals? And so I know the DMZ actually in Ryerson, they have a brand new cybersecurity training program where they're encouraging people, whether it's students or professionals or people returning to the workforce, to come through and get actual training. And you don't have to have that computer science background. And that's something that I found really cool because I don't come from a technical background. Madeleine didn't, and it's nice to see that there are other avenues to get into a technical world, because it's where the future is heading. The world's getting more and more technical, and I think if there's ways for people to get in there that aren't just a computer science bachelor's degree, then I think that that's really beneficial.
Also, I would just add two things. One is that understanding basic code is just probably useful to, even if you don't become someone who's professionally very technical, even for translating conversations and realizing it can inform your marketing strategy or your sales strategy, and understanding the basic mechanics of it, and having those slightly more technical conversations. But also something that I earlier this year, I interviewed the heads of security at a few different Canadian startups, and the heads of security at Shopify and Wealthsimple. What both of them had mentioned separately was that you don't even need like a BSc or like a computer science degree to become a cybersecurity analyst. And they were saying it like quite motivationally, which is that if you're passionate about cybersecurity, then you can do one of those programs like what Rachel had mentioned, and become competent in that. And like, passion is like one of the only prerequisites, and then you can learn and and engage in that. And so I also just say that, as the job market's tough, and if people are interested in it, it's like a really good opportunity to have a career with a lot of promise and potential and do meaningful work.
Yeah. I think that you're right. Like that training doesn't necessarily have to come from like of a textbook or a curriculum or a program. It can be self-taught and learn. One of the interesting stories is we work very closely with like Nuvo, to the elections technology. You can imagine election technology would have to be super secure, and the founder of that, he has no professional training. He's a journalist, right? He went to school for journalism, but as growing up, his father was a cybersecurity guy. Like he was CTO of Enbridge Gas, like a top guy there. And his dad would like purposely give him machines that are broken. It's like, oh, if you want to play with this, fix this. But then also like put in like security codes to like block off games or like block off different parts of the computer. And he would have to hack, hack his dad's code in order to get access to games or get access to the internet. And every time he did, his dad would put on a different layer of security, and like and that was his like angst against fighting against his dad was like driving force to get him to learn cybersecurity, like how penetration works. And he laughs about it now. He works very closely. His dad's like an advisor in the company, and he laughs about it. Like that was the training that led to this, right? Because right,
That's
but
hilarious.
like not everyone gets that kind of exposure therapy, right? What did you guys do to learn better? Have you guys got into learning code? How's your learning curve been? Like, where's your sources?
So I'll go first, I guess. I've joined as many engineering meetings as possible, as many product meetings as possible, asking all the questions, and even just saying like, let me just sit in the background. Don't worry if I understand it. I'll internalize it. But also subscribing to certain email lists. I started a Twitter that just follows cybersecurity professionals to understand what people are interested in, where those professionals are learning. And then for myself, being in partnerships and sales role, it's talking to our network, talking to potential customers, getting feedback from cybersecurity analysts of what problems they're facing, what they see in the industry, how they feel, whether or not they were ever to buy our product, how they feel it could actually impact their role or not. And just having that open dialogue and collecting that feedback has taught me so much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and even though sorry, go for it.
Yeah, I was going to say it's kind of exposure therapy, right? When you surround yourself with people in the field, you kind of subliminally like just absorb kind of some of their knowledge.
Exactly, it's great. Yeah. Surround yourself with people smarter than you are. That's the mission.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry, you were saying something.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, I had a similar approach to Rachel. At one point, I did attempt a Coursera coding course, and it didn't go too well. So, so I just relied on learning by osmosis. But yeah, I think even though I was saying how amazing it would be to have that coding introduced into schools, I still feel like being in marketing or being in sales of a company like Penfield, it's okay to not have that super technical competency. It's like just goes back to what we were saying of like being open to learning and having that growth mindset and being a keen learner. I think is probably more important, especially if you're committed and a quick learner. Then that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, it's about competency too, right? Like what you're good at. Like focus on what you're good at. And then surround yourself with people who are, complementary to you, that complementary to your skills. And that's kind of like what a startup is. You have a team mentality. Each person has a specialty that they can bring to the team environment, and together you kind of fill in the blanks, right? But more on that, like I took it as a personal challenge to learn code. My team as well, right? For the last 2 years, it's been to say it bluntly, the shit show, right? Because I would go into this course and be like, I don't know this, so then I have to go to a different course to learn that aspect, come back, and then that'll spiral into something else, right? And it's a funny thing when you're trying to learn something new. It's like the unknown unknowns, like what you don't know, and it just. And it's like a rabbit hole, right? You just kind of keeps kind of spiraling downwards. But I think it's a good spiral because, like, end of the day, like it just opens you up to like a new realm of knowledge, right? So it's always good to challenge yourself. So going back to your respective roles with marketing and sales, right? How do you market and sell cybersecurity, a technology company, an AI company, right? What goes behind the scenes there?
Well, I guess we're still quite early stage, so we are just trying to socialize with as many people in the industry as possible, collect the feedback, and then continue to refine our product accordingly. At the end of the day, one of our big differentiators is that we're addressing the human element. So like we mentioned at the start, we're not in the detection space, we're not a tool specific for remediation, but we're actually looking at the human side of things. And so we try to take a human approach in all of this. We want to understand how people would feel about this product, how they would feel about certain features, and incorporate that into the product, because we're not, I don't know, there's a lot of tools out there with automation where people are scared they're going to lose their jobs. And especially in a year like this past year has been, where a lot of people unfortunately did lose their jobs, businesses don't want to lay any more people off. That's not the intent. So our whole mission is to improve people's capabilities and ensure they're even better at their jobs, more critical to their companies. And we've been really taking that approach on the sales side, at least, and we've been getting some great feedback.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
On the marketing side, I know you're mentioning it's like we let the engineers be the engineers. We're going to focus on what we're good at. But marketing especially has become so programmatic almost, right? It's almost like it's almost like algorithms you're deploying and you're working with, right? Can you speak more about the marketing element? What goes on in your head?
Yeah, for sure. So I think marketing has taken a very data-driven approach, a lot of experimentation. Like if you're not constantly iterating and learning new things, then it's hard to evaluate that you're being successful. It's how you measure success. So going back to some of what Rachel was saying, we learned a ton by having these initial conversations to lay the foundation with customers and potential customers to hear what resonates, what their fears are, what the gaps are. And that was helpful just initially because, as we said, we're young. So I'm finding really strong product market fit. And then we've had really fun branding exercises to, now that we've aggregated those insights, what's our tone? What's our vision? What are we aiming to accomplish? And I think we've set ourselves apart from other cybersecurity companies, a lot of which are very fear-mongering based. And as we talked about, there are things to be fearful of for sure. But as Rachel noted, we're like a human-first company. Like we're using AI to help humans, which is pretty novel. Sometimes people hear AI and like, oh no, that means job loss. That's not what we're about. And so that we've been trying to translate that into our marketing strategy and how we come across and how we do our messaging. But back to your question about how are you market driven, just comes down to A/B testing, tracking traffic to our site and generating content. So we're also lucky that our founders are very well regarded in the industry, and so then they also speak at conferences and things like that help make my job easier. So that's it essentially. And because we've had such a strong network, now is really the time where marketing is picking up and becoming even more crucial as we scale. And so there'll be even more insights to leverage. But you're absolutely right that it's becoming a very data-driven game.
Yeah. One of the things that blew my mind is how much technology and tools are available, right, to this industry, marketing and sales. So I come from a heavy sales background myself, right? And I came from a very traditional element. I worked a lot of engineering. Energy in the energy industry, right? Energy industry is still pen and paper. It's so backward. So my level of tech, any tech I brought in was just so revolutionary. But one of the things is with BloomX, as I started working with startups again, starting 2 years ago, we wanted to help solve this problem that startups had, which is sales, right? All startups, it's a race for revenue, right? If you're not revenue positive, if you can't get revenue and move your product to show market fit, you're not going to get additional funding. You're not going to be able to get out of that hump of being in the land of death, right? Where you're just bleeding money. So revenue is a key for any company. And the people who are doing the sales, doing the marketing is the headline of that. It's one thing to make a product. It's another thing to sell it and improve market fit, right? And move it forward. So we were trying to do is like, and we kind of are, is like we kind of have a co-creation agency, we call it, where we help startups with sales. And last year with COVID, we had the benefit of working with a few medical firms, med tech companies, and we're helping them with sales. And coming from a more traditional background, we're like, okay, cool, we're going to deploy human elements to this. We're going to get people behind this. We're going to contract it out. And what I quickly realized was that if we can string together integrated technologies together, a team of very few people can do a very a lot of damage, right? It can perform like a bigger team can. And so speaking of tools, like one of the things I discovered was like we can use something a CRM called Close.io, which allows you to make phone calls, but it's also recorded. And then you tie that with like Gong.io, which then takes those recordings and analyzes it and uses AI to like analyze the call recording, see where the win-loss is and who's going off script, who's not, and what's going on there, and give you analysis back. And then you can use automations. You can use an automation tool that help figure out leads and like where to get call logs from and get that from. Then you have LinkedIn automation that's growing your presence online, and then boom, that's running automatically. So suddenly one person is now acting like a team of 5 or 10, right? And if you can string along the technologies together, you don't necessarily know how they worked, but you just need to know how to like deploy them in the field, right? So suddenly I think the technology has allowed a certain shift in the marketplace where smaller teams can act not just nimbly anymore, but can outperform bigger teams, which are slower, right? If you can deploy the technologies in the right way, right? Have you guys found that in your with what you're doing?
I think that's exactly along the lines of what we're looking to do. Most security operations centers that we're meeting with these days have job openings that they might not be able to fill simply because there aren't enough people for those seats. So if all of a sudden we can turn a team of 10 into a theoretical team of 15 just by improving their abilities, then that's huge because the businesses want to hire, but there aren't enough people in the seats yet. And I know Canada is doing a lot to sponsor a lot of programs and to create more jobs, and there's training programs. Those are all out there, but until we see the results of that, we have the people in the seats, like we really are hoping that we can see an increase, because that's great. It's like you were saying, it's a well-oiled machine. It's just flying forward. And if you think about cybersecurity as those front lines that are protecting the country, that's exactly what you would want.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, going back to like what you said about AI being used to improve humans, not replace them. Right. I think that modality is so important because I think that's what we've been trained and told. It's like the computers are coming for us, right? The machines are taking over, right? But in reality, like for the people who understand and know how to use it, not necessarily know how to code, but know how to use technology better, right? They can outperform those that don't, right? Have you experienced this yourself, like where you have adopted a new technology and you suddenly like, oh my God, I'm so much more efficient, right? Like, any parallels you see between what you're doing for other people versus in your personal life you experienced?
In my personal life, I started using a tool that aggregates, like it goes back to like, how do I, like learn more about cybersecurity and stay on top of trends. Just a tool that aggregates stories for me, rather than having to surf all the, surf around or cut through the noise of Google alerts. I find that makes me much more efficient. And also, Rachel is really humble, but she's like a sales team of 1 that acts like a team of 5. So she wouldn't say that herself, but that's the truth. Yeah.
Thank you. The one thing I use in my personal life that I don't think I could live without is Keeper, like the password storage thing.
Oh yeah.
Which, to Madeleine's point, I am the worst for remembering my passwords. My friends all make fun of me. And you can't use the same password over and over, but then how do you remember all your passwords? It's just this terrible situation. And then I was told about this tool that can store your passwords safely, and it has changed my life because I no longer am changing all my passwords all the time if I can't remember them. So that was a game changer for sure.
Definitely. For me, it's with the Google passwords, like the manage passwords function is it just like built right in, right, into the Chrome browser. It's pretty useful. But I think I think what you said is so important, like changing passwords. Like it goes back to what you're saying, right? So tuning back to Penfield.AI and like how that improves humans and what they do, right? Like have you got any field tests, like reports back? Like what are people saying about it? Like you talk about iterative design, right? Like
Yeah.
any kind of criticism, any kind of positive reinforcements that have come through?
Yeah, well, our very first POC was the one where we were able to demonstrate the 38% in time to resolve cybersecurity incidents. And that's huge because these breaches grow exponentially with time. So the longer a hacker is in an organization, the more damage they can do. And if you can
Mm.
cut that down, you're de-risking the organization exponentially. So it's definitely not a linear attack by any means. So that's one bit that is amazing. But also on the auditing front, we do intelligent audits on every single incident resolved. But right now in the industry, there's nothing doing that. They're either randomly selecting a handful of incidents each week to audit, or after a breach, they'll go back in and see what went wrong. But there's no way to know if the people on the team might be dropping the ball because they have 10 other things in the queue and they're really stressed out. And this is what keeps CEOs up at night, worried that they're going to get breached. So now if you have a tool that can actually conduct an immediate audit on every single incident that comes in to ensure that it's being completed correctly, you can just get ahead of any potential mistakes, because at the end of the day, we all make mistakes. It's only human. Companies expect their people to make mistakes. That's not the problem. It's just mitigating any risk that comes along with it. So that's a big thing that I think is really resonating with a lot of the people we're speaking with these days.
No, I think that's great. Like, that's a great set. Could you talk a little bit more about the auditing factor, right? I mean, you'd naturally think that companies would be, doing self audits and things like that. What's your product offering there?
Yeah, I mean, they definitely do. If you think of a bank, they have billions and billions of cybersecurity incidents each day. And by incident, I mean a potential hack. It might not be a hack, it could just be a false positive or something, but there's potential that that could be a hacker attacking the company. And so they do have people working around the clock to audit and make sure that things are being done correctly, but there's just such a large volume that humans can't keep up. And you can't automate it because it's a dynamic problem, as we addressed, where the hackers are always changing. So
Mhm.
there just hasn't been a tool that's been able to do it yet. But our founders spent multiple years researching with some of the top minds to come up with this. And they spent many years before it was ever turned into a product, ensuring that it actually could do it. So because we can model the actions of analysts, understand what workflows are correct and not correct, as analysts are performing their duties, if Penfield detects that something's deviating from that standard norm, it'll flag it. And doesn't mean that it's wrong and the analyst has done a bad thing, but it can just put a second set of eyes on it to see if any additional work needs to be done to ensure it's completed correctly.
Cool. That's fascinating. Can you? I guess we'll end off with this one last question. Who is an ideal customer for this, for Penfield? Is it an SME? Is it a specialized firm, small businesses, enterprises, or like a mix of them, mixed bag?
Because we're small right now, we're coming to market, we're targeting MSSPs and MDRs. So that's managed security service providers and managed detection and response service providers. So these are essentially kind of your SOC as a service. They have security operations centers that businesses that don't have their own can go to and kind of outsource it to. So we're targeting those companies as well as financial institutions. So any of the banks across Canada, also similar companies across the US. So we speak with a lot of VPs of security operations, CEOs, CFOs, chief information security officers, anyone that's really, responsible for the health of the business and the safety of the business. Those are our targets. As we scale and we have more salespeople, more engineers to deploy, there's massive markets out there that could benefit from this product, but that's our main focus for this year.
Fantastic. Do you feel like there's ever there's a need for governments themselves to get more support from the private sector and secure themselves?
Absolutely. We've spoken with numerous sections within the Canadian government. We know people in the US as well. There's definitely a need and there's definitely interest. There's interest, there's funding available. and we're getting great feedback from those sectors as well. So it's absolutely an important space. I think, the government is so responsible for protecting all of its citizens, and I think they do a great job of it, but they definitely have shown some interest so far.
Great. Well, I wish you guys the best. This is definitely, we need more cybersecurity in our personal lives, but also in the institutions we work with. So kudos to you guys. Looking forward to seeing you guys grow and move out in the industry. But Madeleine, Rachel, thank you so much for your time and coming on.
Thank you. Thanks for your
It's been
time.
Thank you so much.